In this episode, we build a plain language glossary that helps you think quickly and clearly when AI audit terms show up, because speed on an exam comes from clarity, not from rushing. Beginners often get stuck because a term feels technical, and when it feels technical, the brain tries to either memorize it mechanically or avoid it completely. Neither approach works well for an audit-focused certification, because the exam is really testing whether you can recognize what a term implies for risk, evidence, and oversight. So the goal here is to turn key terms into simple meanings you can say out loud, and then link each meaning to the kind of question an auditor would ask. A good glossary does not make you sound fancy, and it does not rely on jargon to feel smart. It makes your thinking steady, so when you hear a term like model drift or data provenance, you immediately know what it means and why an auditor cares. That is what fast recall looks like for beginners. Not instant memorization, but instant understanding. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Start with the term AI system because it is easy to imagine it as just a model, and that is usually the first mistake. An AI system includes the model, the data that flows into it, the software around it, the people who use it, and the decisions it influences. From an audit viewpoint, that broader definition matters because risk and control can sit outside the model itself. A model might be statistically strong, but the overall system can still be risky if people rely on it blindly, if data is fed into it incorrectly, or if changes happen without oversight. Another essential term is use case, which simply means the specific purpose the organization is using the system for, such as screening candidates, prioritizing tickets, or detecting fraud. Use case matters because acceptable risk depends on context, and a model that is fine for a low-stakes recommendation could be dangerous in a high-stakes decision. When you connect these two terms, you get a powerful audit habit. Always ask what the full system is and what the use case is, because those define what evidence and control should exist. Next is the term requirement, which is a documented expectation the system should meet. Requirements can describe what the system should do, what it should not do, what performance is acceptable, and what constraints must be respected, such as privacy or safety. Beginners sometimes think requirements are only technical, but audit-focused requirements also include governance expectations like who approves changes and how decisions are reviewed. Closely connected is acceptance criteria, which are the specific conditions that must be true before the organization considers the system ready for use. Acceptance criteria matter because they turn vague goals into something testable and auditable. Another essential term is risk, which in plain language is the possibility of a harmful outcome combined with how likely it is to happen and how severe it could be. An auditor cares about risk because audits prioritize what matters most, and risk is how you decide what deserves attention first. If you can define requirements, acceptance criteria, and risk in plain language, you can handle many exam questions because you can always ask what was expected and what could go wrong. Now let's cover training data, validation, and inference because these terms show up constantly and can be explained without math. Training data is the information used to teach the model patterns, like examples that help it learn what to predict. Validation is the checking process that tests whether the model performs well on data it did not see during training, which helps estimate how it will behave in the real world. Inference is the act of using the trained model to make a prediction or output in real time or near real time. Auditors care about these terms because each one creates a different kind of evidence trail. Training data connects to questions about data quality, representativeness, and privacy. Validation connects to questions about test results, performance thresholds, and whether the model was tested in conditions similar to production. Inference connects to questions about how outputs are used, how decisions are made, and what monitoring exists after deployment. These terms matter because they tell you where the model learned, how it was checked, and how it is used, which is the core story of any AI system. A term that often shows up in audit discussions is data provenance, which simply means where the data came from and how it was handled over time. Provenance matters because data can be wrong, biased, incomplete, or collected in a way that violates policies or expectations, and those issues can quietly shape outcomes. Another term is data quality, which refers to whether data is accurate, complete, consistent, timely, and relevant for the intended use. Beginners sometimes think data quality is a technical detail, but in audits it is a governance issue too, because organizations must choose what data they trust and how they verify it. Another important term is labeling, which refers to how examples are marked with correct answers during training, such as labeling emails as spam or not spam. Labeling matters because poor labeling can teach the model the wrong lesson, and auditors may evaluate how labels were created and reviewed. If you keep these terms together, you get a simple message. Models learn what data teaches them. So auditing the data story is often more important than debating the model's internal mechanics. Now let's define bias and fairness in a way that supports clear thinking without getting lost in abstract debate. Bias, in this context, means the system produces systematically different outcomes for different groups or situations in a way that creates unfairness or harm. Fairness is the goal of ensuring outcomes are appropriate and do not create unjustified disadvantage, especially when decisions affect people. Auditors care because fairness is not just an ethical topic, but also a business and legal risk topic when AI influences hiring, lending, healthcare, policing, or customer access. Another important term is explainability, which means the ability to describe why the system produced a certain output in a way that a human can understand. Explainability matters because organizations need to justify decisions, troubleshoot errors, and maintain trust, and it becomes especially important when the consequences are serious. A closely related term is transparency, which means being open about how the system is used, what it can and cannot do, and what oversight exists. For exam thinking, these terms are clues that you should prioritize documentation, testing, and human oversight rather than trusting results because they look efficient. A very practical term for auditors is control, which means a safeguard designed to prevent problems, detect problems, or correct problems. Preventive controls stop issues before they happen, detective controls alert you when something is going wrong, and corrective controls help you fix issues and restore safety. You do not need to memorize those categories as labels to use the idea, but you should understand that controls are about managing risk through deliberate actions and processes. Another key term is governance, which means the structure of ownership, decision-making, policies, and oversight that guides how the system is created and used. Governance answers questions like who approves deployment, who can change the model, who monitors performance, and who has authority to pause or stop the system when necessary. A related term is accountability, which means clear responsibility for decisions and outcomes, not just responsibility for tasks. On exam questions, governance and accountability terms usually point to answers that clarify roles, approvals, and evidence of oversight rather than answers that focus on technical improvements alone. For beginners, it helps to remember that governance is how an organization proves it is not running the system on autopilot. Another set of essential terms relates to changes over time, which is a major risk area for AI systems. Model drift means the model's performance changes because the world changes, such as customer behavior shifting, new fraud patterns emerging, or new products creating different kinds of data. Data drift is a related idea where the incoming data looks different from the data the model was trained on, which can cause performance to drop even if the model itself has not changed. Monitoring is the process of tracking signals over time to detect drift, failures, or unusual outcomes before they become major incidents. Another important term is threshold, which is a predefined boundary that triggers action, such as an error rate that is too high or a confidence score that is too low. Auditors care about these terms because they show whether the organization has a plan for ongoing oversight, not just a plan for initial deployment. A system that is safe on day 1 can become unsafe on day 100, and audits often focus on whether the organization is prepared for that reality. These terms are the language of sustained control in a changing environment. Let's define human in the loop, because it is a term that can sound like a buzzword until you attach it to real oversight. Human in the loop means a human reviews, confirms, or can override automated outputs at key points, especially when decisions affect people, money, safety, or rights. This does not mean a human must approve every single output, but it does mean the organization decides where human judgment is required and documents that decision. A related term is escalation, which means a defined path for raising issues to someone with authority when something unusual or risky happens. Escalation matters because systems fail, and the difference between a small issue and a major harm event is often whether people noticed and acted quickly. Another term is exception handling, which means the process for dealing with cases that do not fit normal patterns, such as a ticket that the model cannot categorize or a decision that conflicts with policy. These terms matter in audits because they show whether the organization designed the system to support human responsibility rather than replace it. On the exam, they often point to answers that emphasize review, escalation, and documentation. Another group of terms you should be able to explain quickly relates to evidence and documentation, because audit work depends on proof. Evidence is any reliable information that supports a conclusion, such as requirements documents, approval records, test results, monitoring reports, or incident logs. Documentation is the practice of recording decisions, processes, and results so they can be reviewed and verified later. Traceability means you can connect a decision or outcome back to the requirements, data, testing, and approvals that justify it, creating a chain of accountability. Another essential term is audit trail, which is a record of actions and events that allows someone to reconstruct what happened, when, and by whom. These terms are powerful on exam questions because answer choices often differ in whether they create verifiable evidence. When you see evidence and traceability concepts, the best answer is usually the one that strengthens the ability to prove what happened and why, rather than the one that relies on informal assurances. For beginners, this is a simple rule. If you cannot prove it, you cannot audit it. Now let's define impact, because it is the bridge between technical performance and real-world consequences. Impact means the effect the system has on people, operations, decisions, finances, safety, and trust, and impact can be intended or unintended. A term closely tied to impact is stakeholder, which refers to anyone affected by the system, including users, customers, employees, regulators, and even communities in some contexts. Another important term is harm, which means negative impact that is significant enough to matter, such as unfair denial of service, safety risks, privacy violations, or financial loss. Auditors care about these terms because risk is not just about system failure, but also about who gets hurt when failure happens. Many AI audit questions require you to think beyond the organization's internal goals and consider broader consequences of automated decisions. This is not about moralizing, but about recognizing the full risk landscape, which can include legal exposure and reputational damage. When you can define impact, stakeholders, and harm clearly, you can better evaluate what controls and oversight are appropriate. As you carry this glossary forward, remember that the point is not to recite definitions perfectly, but to be able to use each term as a trigger for audit reasoning. When you hear AI system and use case, you should think about scope and context. When you hear requirements and acceptance criteria, you should think about what the organization promised and how it proved readiness. When you hear provenance and data quality, you should think about whether the inputs are trustworthy and appropriately handled. When you hear bias, fairness, and explainability, you should think about human impacts, transparency, and justification of decisions. When you hear controls, governance, drift, monitoring, and escalation, you should think about ongoing oversight and response. That is what fast recall means for beginners. Quick translation from term to implication, so you can choose the best audit action under time pressure. In the next episode, we shift from glossary mode into core AI understanding, so you can explain models clearly enough to ask better questions, which is the foundation of Domain 1A thinking.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.